I have to first say, I know everybody says this. I truly love this film. This is a fantastic film, and it even has a little bit of a personal, just a tiny bit of a personal element to me because my father was a holdover,
Oh, really?
and he actually went to Fork Union Military Academy, where he was shipped there because he was a problem child, and then his parents died while he was there, and so he didn't. His brothers didn't take great care of him. His older brothers didn't take great care of him, so he was held over the Christmas holiday a lot.
Did he end up going into the military as a career?
No, he did not. That steered him away from that. They just they sent him there because he was problem, and he straightened up and then and went on and became a high school teacher for a while, and then a farmer. So here in North
Um,
Carolina.
what a journey. That's a journey.
Yeah, yeah. And so it's so funny too because I that experience has, we as a family could never do anything over Christmas because it was always, no, we need to be home, we need to be together, we need to be, because he never wanted to recreate that experience
That's
again. So
amazing.
it
It's amazing how that psychological kind of sense memory just sort of impacted your childhood and just traveled through his life, you know? That's crazy.
Yeah. So as soon as I got out of the screening, I called him and I said, "I just watched this movie that I think you're gonna like, but it had Fork. It was a reference to Fork Union in there."
It's so funny when I was researching, for the movie, I was like, where would, exactly that, like, what is a tough place that the kids who have some behavioral issues got shipped to, especially in 1970? And Fork Union was like right there. I kept seeing these kind
Yeah.
of anecdotal personal histories mentioning Fork Union,
And I was not a problem growing up. I was straight and narrow on that path for sure. And but he wanted to go back to Fork Union. I wouldn't even get out of the car. It's like, nope.
I don't blame you, man. I mean, if you grew up with your old man kind of going like, this is the single most traumatic event of my life, you're not looking to get out and sample that in any way, shape, or
Yeah,
form.
not at all. Not at all. Um, all right. So again, love this film. Obviously, this is your first script for that's produced as a film, as a feature film.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. How did you attract Alexander's attention with this project?
I wrote a pilot about my own personal experiences in prep school that's set in 1980. It was called Stonehaven, and it was like 90% autobiographical. So it had really nothing in terms of the Venn diagram of the plot and the characters of, holdovers. And so totally different, but just set in this prep school and sort of the story of this awkward kid finding his feet and trying to find a mentor in his life. And I think, I wrote it for just as a spec pilot, and wonder if I could do something with it. My then agent, now manager, read it, and he's known as the guy with the best taste and the worst bedside manner in Hollywood. So we read the script, he goes, "Hey, the pilot Stonehaven." He's like, "I really love this, and it's kind of emotionally resonant, and it's interesting, and it's kind of delicate and it's specific." I said, "Oh, thank you very much." He goes, "Oh, we'll never sell it. Nothing will ever happen with this. This is just like a hothouse flower that you made, but it's very nice. I mean, it's totally useless, but it's very nice." And I was like, "Oh, thank you for diminishing my autobiography that way." It's like, and so I thought to myself, okay, well, nothing will ever happen to this thing. It was almost like me kind of just investigating my own growing up, right? And a love letter to the people that raised me. And then what I didn't know is he got it to a guy named Niels Mueller, who's a really good friend of Alexander Payne's, another client of his is a guy named Niels Mueller. And Niels, all this unbeknownst to me, got it to Alexander, who read it, and Alexander read the pilot, Stonehaven, and called me out of the blue because he'd had this log line in his head, kind of, ocularly challenged, odiferous professors stuck at school with kids over Christmas break, one of whom has been abandoned by his mom. I think that was it. So that's all he had. Well, 12 years sitting on this idea, but couldn't crack it because he hadn't had the experience. But he read my pilot and said, "Oh my God, this is the guy." So he called me up out of the blue. And I thought I was producing a show called Whiskey Cavalier for ABC. I'd created that, was running that. So I was flying back and forth to Europe, and I was tired to the point of delirium. And I get this phone call on the 405. And I don't even look because I'm just like barely, I'm just trying to stay awake, getting home. And I get this phone call and I answer it, and the voice in the line says, "Oh, David Hemingson, Alexander Payne." And I thought it was my buddy Bob who used to like mess with me. Like he would call me up and like say like David Hemingson, Francis Ford Coppola. And like at that time I actually believed him at one point about 7 years ago, 8 years ago. And I was like, oh my God, it's so honored to talk to you. He's like, I'm not Francis Ford Coppola. Why the fuck would he call you? Come on, give me a break. So let's go get it. So, I thought I was just getting pranked. Uh, and almost hung up the phone. And then I noticed the Omaha area code and I was like, oh my God, it's actually Alexander Payne. And he just said, I read your pilot. I love your pilot. I want to make your pilot, but I'm wondering if you would consider writing a film for me in the same world with that kind of log line. And that's how it all happened. It's like a golden ticket, a Willy Wonka thing.
That's an amazing story. So obviously he is well known for writing his own material, and yet
Yeah.
he's working with you as a screenwriter on this project. What was it like working with someone who is so notable as a screenwriter?
It was
You know,
daunting. It was daunting, man, because it's like one of these things where, you know, you're a fan and then all of a sudden you're tapped to join the band. I think I was always thinking like, Billy Preston getting tapped by the Beatles, or more accurately, like that guy who replaced Steve Perry in Journey getting
right, right.
tapped, like, hey, you want to sing lead? I'm like, are you kidding me? So, obviously he's a great screenwriter. He's won two Academy Awards for screenwriting, and been nominated 7 times. So it was daunting, but the great thing is Alexander, in addition to being a true genius, is one of the most generous people that I know, and very much wanted me to tell my story. He had a few mile markers he wanted me to hit, which I kind of described to you, and then I would send him pages, and he would sort of say, because he's very Midwestern, he's very Nebraskan. He'd be very gentle, be like, well, I don't really think we want to go in this direction, or how about more in this direction? And so it was a wonderful process. I mean, we become really close friends. Um, he's just a brilliant guy, and he knew the right questions to ask, and he had the security and the generosity to sort of let me run with it. And because he's the director, he'll tell me when he wants things to change. Or there were situations in which even, this happens because I've been in television for 27 years. You'll get a phone call saying we can't get X location,
Mhm.
and we need to figure something out fast. But the good news is you've been writing TV for 27 years, which I have. Even when we're scouting, he's like, that Winter Carnival you wrote, yeah, we just can't do it. We don't have the picture cars. It's outside. It's going to be too expensive. We don't have the location. And so, okay, what do we got? And then that's how the candlepin bowling scene, the duckpin bowling scene came
Mm.
about. Literally, it's like, look at this duckpin bowling. And I was like, give me 20 minutes. And I just banged out that duckpin bowling scene and sent it to him. He's like, that's what we're doing. So, it's wonderful that at this point in my life, at this point in my career, I couldn't have told this story at any other point in my career. I mean, this is a beautiful bit of serendipity, because I feel like I've matured as a writer sufficiently. I've found the perfect collaborator to sort of work with, and I have enough, I think, elasticity, and I'm nimble enough as a writer because of all those years in TV to sort of respond to him and sort of hear what he has to say. So I really feel blessed that the whole thing went down like this.
Yeah, absolutely. So after that 27 years of maturity in television, clearly now you're looking at writing this as a feature film.
Yeah,
Um, Television has 10 plus episodes, multiple hours to be able to
yeah,
tell a
yeah,
story, to build characters. You've got time, you've got luxury. That's why so many people are running to television these days.
absolutely, absolutely.
Now you've got 2 hours in a film.
Yep.
How does that shift your writing?
That's a
Uh,
brilliant question. That is a brilliant question. And I'm glad you asked it, because it's at the forefront of my mind all the time. Writing a TV show, basically, everything is, I would think of everything in terms of three acts, right? So writing a TV show, your pilot's your first act. Your pilot's like, here are the characters, here's the situation, here are the material complications, here's, maybe a false victory and a progressive complication, but you leave the people at the end of that pilot with like, oh my God, what's going to happen next? And the answer is tune in to find out, right? That's the whole premise behind TV, is tune in to find out. And your whole TV series is your second act, like in a screenplay. So all you're doing is kind of amending and restating character dynamics. You're kind of leaning into crises that you want to kind of gin up and then reconcile. You want to advance the characters' narratives, but you're going to stay with those same heroes fundamentally in a TV show, typically, right? And it's going to be their journey, their ups and downs, which you ideally sustain for as long as is creatively satisfying or commercially satisfying. Like Gunsmoke ran for like what, 25 years. I mean, The Simpsons is like 30 years and still going, something like that. So that's the second act. Basically, that's 30 years of second act, for The Simpsons.
mhm.
Then when there's a finale, there'll either be a 3 episode finale or a 1 season finale or a 1 episode finale. So your third act is very short, and your first act is 1 episode, and this is your entire series. It's a second act. And the great news about the great news about having a feature, writing a feature is all that is completely ripped away from you, completely ripped away from you. Like you exactly what you just said. You gotta back all that character development, all that sort of arc, the fantastic rise, the difficulties, the reversals, the false victory, the all is lost moment, the all the things that we traditionally build into a narrative to keep it satisfying and compelling. 2 hour parking spot. You got to back all that into a 2 hour parking spot. So it requires a tremendous amount of economy. It requires many more, I think, hard choices than television. I mean, you have to make so many hard choices. It requires, I think, a clarity of vision. Like as a screenwriter, I've discovered that like you just have to understand the world and the characters 1,000%. And the process of writing the screenplay is your continuing evolution in terms of understanding. Like you have to understand the world more. You have to understand the arc more. You have to understand the characters more. And draft after draft, it has to get more and more economical. It's got to get more and more um, tight. It's got to get more and more propulsive, but it's also got to leave room for what Miyazaki called like these moments of quiet reflection that allow the audience to catch up and allow the character's journey to have some integrity, right? So
Hmm.
you got to do all that in 2 hours, whereas you could have done select moments of that over X number of years. It's thrilling, it's difficult. I find it immensely gratifying. I feel so lucky and so fortunate to be a screenwriter. I love movies, and so I hope that this movie is a reflection of my love of film, and that process.
Absolutely. And plus, since you're collaborating so closely with Alexander, so, you can rely on the tools of cinema to be able to influence these character arcs. Whereas on a television show, those arcs are basically written down, they're stated. I mean, there is some nuance to it, of course,
Yeah.
but within a film, you're looking at production design, you're looking at, editing choices that, all the kinds of tools that a director has to be able to underscore character traits.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Little Thing's a great example in the movie. A friend of mine mentioned this to me the other day, which I was really moved by. There's a scene where he's talking to Miss Crane, and she said something like, isn't it a time like this that the boys need you most? And this is after they had a long conversation. He realizes that this woman genuinely cares for him, and there's this moment of him letting his guard down. He says, "You're a very sweet person, Miss Crane," and she says, "So are you when you want to be." And you see all that possibility. But the way Alexander shoots it, and of course she sees something over his shoulder and gets up, and it turns out that's her boyfriend. But the way he shoots it is so brilliant because you kind of settle into that conversation, and Paul pauses before he says, you're a very sweet person, Mrs. Crane." And you see, like, it's just the genius of his acting. It's the genius of the lighting, it's the genius of the set deck. All of it just kind of conspires to provoke this response in you. And it's just a simple line, you're a very sweet person, Miss Crane. But the way Alexander framed it and the way Paul, acted it, it just becomes this island, this oasis of like possibility for him that's snatched away. But the way it's snatched away is you don't see. She gets up and you kind of hinge up and see, oh, he looks over his shoulder and sees the kiss. And then you see his face totally collapse. And Alexander did that on purpose because he wanted to really show how close, how hard it was for him to open up and how devastating let go was. So not moving the actor, keeping him right here like this, right? And just playing everything is a testament to the director's brilliance and the actor's brilliance. I mean, to be able to pull off that transition without moving your head like a quarter of an inch in either direction, kind of brilliant, you know?
Yeah, it's an amazing performance. I mean, so many amazing performances in the film. Um, One thing that my favorite films, I connect with films the most that balance the line between comedy and drama so well. This is one. Terms of Endearment, I think, is another one that
That's a
does that.
big Jim Brooks
Yeah.
fan.
Oh yeah, yeah, he's amazing. Um, how do you do that as a screenwriter? How do you make those moments so everything feels genuine, but nothing feels, within this film, the comedy moments fit perfectly. They don't feel extraneous. They don't feel shoehorned in. So how do you do that?
Um, I think it's trial and error to some extent. You do drafts and you figure it out. But I think, what I've discovered recently, and it's like, I kind of came up with this idea that animates the entire movie, which is um, kind of the extraordinary lives of ordinary people that we basically are all on this journey and everybody in this movie has sort of had these unspeakable things happen to them, real difficulty, real, you know, emotional turmoil, Mary, of course, suffering the worst loss possible. Paul being ostracized and being an outcast, the kid being an outcast, struggling with mental health issues, struggling with alcohol, like all these things are going on. Um, and yet, they still manage to persevere. They show remarkable strength and they show like love to each other, right? So as long as I kind of keep that in my mind, this idea of extraordinary or even extraordinary people bound to ordinary circumstances, if you want to flip it, because that's, I think most people have remarkable, brilliant and beautiful things in them, but we're often bound and chained to our circumstances. So for me it's about what is the truest emotional response given the narrative tent poles that I've set up. Like, I know I want this to happen in the movie because it feels like it should happen, and it feels like it's pushing the characters closer, and it's a journey that I want them to take. What interpersonal aspects of their relationships that I've established can I amplify in any given moment to both show their intelligence and their humor, right? And their compassion, but also to flip it and show their sort of insecurity and at times selfishness. And for the holdover specifically, it was the idea of dissembling. It was the idea of how when you get on one side of a lie, this is how I kind of cracked it open for Angus and Paul. How if you're on the same side of a secret, then it's you against the world, and you get to share with each other. For example, when he hurts himself and he goes to the hospital and he lies about going to Swan's Pond and doing it,
Mm-hmm.
and Paul goes along with it, right? Paul
Yep.
goes along with it. Well, once Paul goes along with it, the two of them share a shameful or guilty secret, right? That's not the truth.
Right.
And they're in bed together. They're sort of like, now they're alive. When you have that kind of, almost conspiracy, when you have that sort of like secret from the rest of the world, you'll share things with that person that you hold a secret with because it's you against the world that you won't share with anybody else. So that's a great way to sort of open up the emotion and the comedy because, you know, there's we're all flawed creatures. Paul did something he never do. The kid finds it hysterical. The kid, kind of busts him for it, says, now you owe me, right? And then on the B side, when Paul and he says, well, it's a one-time thing, and Bart men don't lie. And then when he meets Hugh Kavanaugh, he lies, and the kids goes along with it, right? And he's like, yeah, what the fuck just happened? Like, don't get me wrong, that was fun and all, but you just lied through your teeth. Then Paul feels like he has to tell the story of how he got kicked out of Harvard. So the idea of finding moments of awkwardness and comedy and discomfort, or challenges that provoke a situation wherein two people, specifically Paul and Angus, have to kind of cover for each other, right? Gets you comedy, but it also opens up the possibility of a deeper emotional conversation between them.
Right.
Because
It binds them.
now they're sharing a secret, and
Yeah.
the more secrets they share with each other, the closer they get, right up to the point where he lies about what happened in Boston. He said, I told the kid, I insisted that he go.
Hmm.
He tells a final lie, and that final lie is the greatest sacrifice he's ever made in his life, you
Right.
know? And he lies,
Incredibly.
he misrepresents himself so the kid can be saved.
Right. You talked about Mary and her subplot is incredibly poignant, very painful. Um, I lost my mother a month before I saw this film, so some of those scenes where she's holding. I mean, obviously different circumstances, but those scenes where she's holding her child, she's going through the baby artifacts that she's handing down to her sister, very poignant. Just really hit home with me. I'm not going to say how much I cried, but maybe a little. um, but
Well, I'm heartbroken for your loss. I lost my mother. This Mary basically is based on my mother. My
oh,
relationship with my mother is the foundation for Mary. But please go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
no, 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 not at all. That's interesting to know because I was wondering, kind of like in a lesser film, I feel like that plot would have been minimized, or it might have even been left on the cutting room floor. But here, it feels so integral into the whole narrative of what you're trying to tell. What do you think that brings the film?
Well, I wrote that part, and this movie is, I lost my mom. It's almost 24 years ago, but very suddenly, and we were very, very close. I mean, she was a single working mother. She was an RN. I come from a lower middle class family, and my parents divorced. We were kind of left alone. We were kind of in a financially difficult situation. And she would get up, 4:45 in the morning, go to work so she could be home in time to cook me dinner when I was going to school, right? That's the life she led. And so for me, I wanted to honor that in this movie because I grew up around women who did that all day, every day. Not just my mom, but the RNs and the licensed practical nurses, my uncles, my mother's brothers, and my great uncle Doc. They were janitors at the courthouse in New Middletown, Connecticut, and at Wesleyan University. So I grew up around working people.
Mhm.
Um, and I know what kind of sacrifices. I've seen those up close, and I wanted that kind of energy in the movie because I wanted to honor my mom, and I was sort of like, I just did this thought experiment. I'd lost her, and how devastating it was for me to lose her. And it was devastating. It took me years to recover. Um, and then I thought to myself, what if she'd lost me? What would that look like? And I put that into Mary. So I kind of took everything I felt about my mother and our closeness, and I kind of had her be the one survive and the son be the one who died, and sort of like played that out. How do you sustain your life when the bitter irony of the fact that she went to Barton and took this job so he could go to Barton. He crushed it at Barton. He was great, but they didn't have the money and he went and got killed. And she's still there cooking for these kids who didn't have to go because they were rich. Like, what kind of immense, all-consuming sadness is she battling? What kind of rage is in there? What kind of like mechanisms is she using to push back? Humor is one of them. I mean, part of her comedy is kind of a defense mechanism. And I think she's also an immeasurably strong person. And I wanted to put all those attributes into a woman because I wanted to kind of show what my mother was to me. And that's kind of the genesis of Mary, honestly.
When I interviewed Dailiy, I read a she doesn't read her own reviews, but I
Yeah.
read a line that came from a review that said basically, I'm paraphrasing, but it was the brilliance of her performance is what she doesn't say, but what she conveys with looks, how she
Yeah.
reacts to things, the volumes that she speaks, just with her physical performance and her
Yeah.
physical acting. Did you work with her at all on that?
I didn't. Devani's got her own process, but it's so funny because that character, because of the enormity, man, of the loss, I wanted to write her stuff as the least dialogue driven. And I
Mhm.
wanted to give her scenes alone, like the scene where she's just doing that puzzle in a room, and we kind of look at the cello in the corner, and we see the Barton, Curtis's room, which has never been touched, left the way he left it when he went to Vietnam. Um, man, yeah. So I wanted to leave as much room for her to have her feelings and to do her thing in those moments. The whole reason I wrote the scene where the mystery box, I call it the mystery box scene. The whole
Mhm.
reason I wrote the mystery box scene without any dialogue is, and believe me, man, I tried to write dialogue around it, and I was like, even dialogue with her sister, but I'm like, I don't think anything I say here can match what the right actor will bring. We always wanted Dave on. We didn't know if we'd have her, but I always had her in mind. Just like, well, Paul, I wrote it for from the get-go.
Mhm.
But Dave, I mean, Alexander and I talked about Dave way, way early in the process. Um, and and I feel like I just knew that whoever the actor was, if they were brilliant, they would bring everything to that scene. And she absolutely, I think she's a genius, and I think she surpassed, anything that I had in my mind for what the character would do. I mean, I made it very simple, but what she did with that simplicity, what she does, she just like Paul, like I mentioned, that all those emotions that cross his face without moving the camera. Same thing with her. She barely moves in that scene. She barely moves, and everything, you know. Um, is that responsive? Hopefully, I didn't
Yeah,
ramble.
no, that's perfect. You talked about writing the part of Paul Hunnam for Paul Giamatti.
Yeah.
Where does Paul Hunnam come from? I know that you've talked about this is a component of your personal life and you going to boarding school. Where does Paul Hunnam come from?
There was a guy named Earl Cahill. I could show you his picture. It's here in my office. A guy named Earl Cahill. Here, let me just get it for you. And after my folks split, he was married to my mother's sister. He stepped into my life when I was a young boy, and he was a veteran of World War II, like my dad was. My dad was 15 when he went to World War II in the Merchant Marine. Earl was like, I think, 20 when he went off to Saipan and fought in the Pacific Theater in some rather brutal conditions. But he came back and married my aunt. And he became my surrogate father. And all of the lines, basically all of Paul Hunham's, I think best lines, if I may say so, my thing, like, stuff like, for most people, that's like a henhouse ladder, shitty and short, or, sex is 99% friction, 5% goodwill, or get up, kid, it's daylight in the swamp. Those were all things that were said to me growing up, by this incredibly hard-bitten, like I always describe them like hard candy, like a Tootsie Pop, like hard candy shell, chewy
Hmm.
caramel center. You know,
Hmm.
he had this chewy caramel center, but he was a real decorated World War II vet, hard ass, who was bald with like these jug handle ears. And I'll show you a picture. He smoked a pipe for a while, and that is Paul. That is Paul. I mean, Paul's essence comes from Earl Cahill, and to a lesser degree, my dad was a merchant seaman who became an academic and went back to become ended his career as a merchant seaman. He shipped out, he captained a containerized cargo vessel like Captain Phillips. That was what my father did. Um, but Earl was the guy, and he just sort of had this remarkable capacity. Um, to he employed the most like Baroque profanity I've ever met in my life. Like he just cursed, but in the most elegantly, kind of blown out way. And I feel like Paul has that too. I think I think Paul Hunham has that same quality. Um, Here you go. This is Earl Cahill uh, at Fort Douglas in 43, if you can see him.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And this is a picture of him um, at 90.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So you can see the bottle of Macallan. I brought him a bottle of Macallan as a gift. Uh, but yeah, I mean, all glory to Earl. I mean, he's the one who sort of he sort of saved me, and I wanted to write a love letter to him. Like I said, this movie's a love letter to ostensibly ordinary people who are really extraordinary people in the teeth of, harrowing circumstances. That to me, that's the movie, and he was an extraordinary person, but looking at him, you wouldn't necessarily know it. You had to get to
Mhm.
know him to understand the depths of his heroism.
Um, Last question for you is the ending of the film. I love but I also find that from different people that I talk to, it's a bit of a Rorschach test. Some people think it's a sad ending. Some people, I'm erring on the side of an uplifting and
Yeah.
uplifting ending. Even though they part, Paul is obviously kicked out of Barton, and he drinks a sip of the I'm sorry, what was
The
it that
Louis
he
Tres, the Louis Tres, yeah, the cognac.
yeah, yeah, the one that he stole, but then he
Yeah,
throws it out the window.
spits it out. Yeah,
Yeah, spits it out, and to me, that's an uplifting moment. That's a moment that he's not going to follow.
what?
He's breaking a breaking a chain there.
Yeah, I meant it. I meant for it to be that.
Okay.
Well, part of the genius though of Alexander Payne is like it was kind of, again, talk about a Rorschach test. Like, again, I said I'm a slobbering fanboy. I love Alexander's work. I mean, working with him
Hmm.
was like work with your heroes. And one of the things that we talked about early on, I said to him, I said, AP, I love the ending of Sideways because, Miles listens to Maya's phone message and he drives up there and he gets up to San Ynez or Paso, I forget where it is, Santa Barbara, and he knocks on that door, and then you cut out, and he said, "Yeah, why do you find that so uplifting?" I said, "Well, because I think she's going to answer the door." He goes, "No, no, she moved away 6 months ago." In his mind, he's like, there's a Hmong family, there's an immigrant family like living there right now in her apartment."
Hmm.
But that's his Rorschach, he sort of is the guy who's like willing to not have it be the sweet ending. That's why we left it ambiguous. I think he might say that Paul might have a different destiny. My Paul in my heart goes to Syracuse, leaves his stuff, and begins a life anew.
Yeah.
So I'm hopeful. I look at the movie honestly, man. It's like almost like a novel. Like I knew where these people were before they got there. And then we drop into their lives for this 2 week period, and then we move on. But in my mind, they all kind of continue to live. In my
Yeah.
mind.
Absolutely. Well, it's a perfect ending to what I consider to be a pretty perfect film. So
God bless you,
thank
man.
you
Thank you so much.
for
Thank
that.
you.